Hey guys, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the two home versions of Capcom's first tag-based fighter in its infamous Versus series, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, released into arcades back in 1996, and for the Saturn and PlayStation in 97 and 98 respectively. Since the Sega Saturn version was released in 97 after its US market had all but dried up, it unfortunately never ended up making its way to the West, so it came to be that the PlayStation version, released in 98, was the only home version of the game to come out in the US. Most hardcore players of the game were well aware of the Saturn version at the time, since it was a remarkably close port of the arcade game and due to the fact that it released earlier than its PlayStation rival. I personally had the Saturn version of the game imported back in 97, Christmas of that year as a matter of fact, so we're going to take a look at that one first. I already had the Pro Action replay cart for the system, so I was fortunate enough to not have to pay a premium for the special set that came with the 4MB RAM cart. And X-Men vs. Street Fighter was a game that required it to function, so you really had no other choice. The benefits are clear right from the get-go, as within just a few minutes you can already start to see that this version is as close to the arcade as you could possibly get. The animation was perfect and the gameplay felt right on track. It's very fast and fluid, and tagging in and out is done with ease, as are the individual moves and combos on the excellent Saturn pad. The game was a huge multiplayer hit when it came out, and there really wasn't anything like it at the time fighting game-wise. The graphics are killer too, with just about every minute detail being accounted for. Sound is just as good with driving melodies and crystal clear character voices. The only real weak spot in the game is its lack of modes. You've got arcade mode and Versus, so it's a really bare-bones experience, which is primarily centered around just local multiplayer. If you're playing solo, it can get a little boring just playing through the arcade ladder over and over. It's one of the few things the PlayStation port has more of, with a time attack and survival mode added in addition to the usual suspects. Still, finding negatives in this port is a stretch.
Tornado Claw!
That being said, let's take a look now at the one version we did get here, 3 months later for the PlayStation. At first glance, everything looks right until you get into your first match. The biggest omission in this port is the lack of the trademark tag gameplay of the arcade and Saturn. Instead, you have one main character and a helper, which acts like an alpha counter from the Street Fighter Alpha series, and will jump in to execute a special move with the intention of countering your opponent's attack, and you can also still do team-up super moves. It's also now more of a classic best-of-3 style instead of just one round like the arcade and Saturn. The reason this huge part of the game was removed was due to memory constraints, being that the PlayStation did not have the advent of an external RAM cartridge like the Saturn, and boy does it show. There is a cheat that you can put in for an original mode which will let you play tag style, but you have to have both players select the mirror image of each other's teams to enable it, and as cool as it is, it gets old pretty quick. Now that we've gotten the tag issue out of the way, let's not harp on it too much and move on to the rest of the package. The graphics really aren't bad at all. Characters are nice and large and there's a ton of color here. The backgrounds look awesome too. When the action gets going and the supers start flying, you'll see some flicker and slowdown, especially on projectile-based attacks. There's a noticeable cut in animation, especially visible on some of the larger sprites like Juggernaut and Zangief. Load times are much more apparent here as well, but it's not game-breaking. Sound is good, however, and the game still does play well even in its edited state. There are a lot of people out there who only ever had the chance to play the PlayStation version of X-Men vs. Street Fighter at home, since importing games wasn't nearly as common back then as it is today. Even though it's become popular to rip the PlayStation port to shreds, I'll admit that I still enjoy it. If you look at it for what it is, even with all the cuts, it's pretty admirable that they tried, especially on a system that really wasn't equipped for it. It's still a good fighting game at its core since it's based around a great arcade game. It's not bad, it's just a rough port. And hey, at least both versions still let you hit start after winning to continue antagonizing your opponent just like in the arcade.
Good.
The Sega Saturn version is the way to go, especially these days. It's actually cheaper, oddly enough, even with the RAM cartridge bundle. For whatever reason, the PlayStation version of X-Men vs. Street Fighter runs around the $60 to $90 mark, while the Saturn copy can usually be found for a lot less than that if you look hard enough. The gameplay is much smoother, and for a lot of folks, not having the tag mode is a deal breaker, considering that was the arcade game's most touted feature. Still, as I had touched on before, the PlayStation version is an impressive attempt, but at this point it's also become an overpriced novelty. As always, guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, subscribing, and of course commenting, and until next time, stay classic.